Namaste, everyone. Welcome to our webinar tonight on Freshman Foundations. We're so excited to have you here tonight, and we know we're going to have an absolutely amazing conversation with our really lovely panelists tonight. Sorry. So I'll go ahead and start introducing everyone. I'm going to start with Dr. Tewari. Dr. Tewari is a licensed psychologist based in California, where she has a thriving private practice that she balances with decades of work in clinical and academic settings. She's written and contributed to multiple textbooks on Indian American, South Asian, and Asian American mental health, and is a real stalwart in the field. So we're really excited to have her here tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Dr. Satnarine is the next person I will introduce. He's the Director of Education at the Hindu American Foundation and brings decades of experience in teaching both Hindu and higher education settings. He's passionate about and involved in the standardization of professional spiritual care, the research and implementation of decolonial methodologies with regard to the Hindu dharmic traditions, and in bringing compassionate ancestral techniques to difficult discussions. We're so thrilled to have you, Dr. Satnarine.
Namaste. Thank you.
And then we have Ashwin Ramaswami, Mr. Ramaswamy, who is currently running for state senate in Georgia and has still made time for us tonight, which we're so grateful for. So of our crew, Mr. Ramaswamy is the most recently a student where he got his JD at Georgetown after earning his BS at Stanford. As the president of the Dharmic Law Association at Georgetown, he was able to serve Buddhist, Hindu, Jain, and Sikh students, and of course brings his lived experience as a student here to our discussion tonight. So thank you and welcome.
Namaste.
So I want to go ahead and jump right into our short hour today to start by asking each of you what you think are the largest mental health or substance use challenges that are facing students right now. And if you can share what you think will mitigate these challenges. But before you answer the question, I'm so sorry. I realized that I wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this session. I know there's a lot of excitement amongst people who couldn't be here tonight, being able to access all of this amazing information. I'm also asking all of you to minimize the chatter on the chat function as much as possible, though we will monitor it. And if you do have questions to add to our panel today, please use the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. It may be next to the share screen function, and we'll be sure to make time for your questions tonight. So, housekeeping aside, I would, again, like to jump into this question about what are the biggest challenges facing students right now, and if you can, offer us what you think is best to mitigate these. So we'd love to start with Dr. Tewari first.
Okay. All right. Well, namaste, and I will jump right in. So in my work with young adults and families, I see three factors that influence anxiety and depression amongst many other biological genetic factors. But in terms of some of the psychosocial and environmental factors, I feel like one of the things that young adults often struggle with, especially those who are in college, is feeling pressure to be someone you're not or doing something you don't want to do. I've found that if students are not grounded in their values, knowing who they are, what their identity is, they're more likely to be influenced by others, whether it's social media influencers telling you what your behaviors and personality should be, or whether it's friends defining what's okay and not okay. As young adults, you have to begin thinking about what's meaningful for you, because it's what you think and believe at the end of the day that is what's important, not what is perceived by others as important. So what are some tools and strategies? I would start with creating a mind map of what's on your mind develop a list of your values, and then prioritize your mind map. And if you don't know what a mind map is, you do a circle with yourself in the middle and sort of do thought bubbles around that and describe all the different things that are in your mind that might be creating anxiety, stress, or what you aspire to. And then again, prioritize it, list your values, and then hopefully it will help you gain some clarity on your evolving identity throughout college. So, and give you a greater sense of positive control. I think it's just overall important to have different strategies to increase your self-awareness so you know what action steps to take to manage mood and change behaviors.
Yeah,
Mhm. So you let me know if you want me to continue with some of the other ones or if you wanted to jump to other speakers.
yeah, let's keep the conversation flowing. I mean, I know we all have a lot to share with everyone, but I appreciate you like really honing in on this idea of being able to ground ourselves in our values and ground ourselves in who we know we are in order to mitigate these forces of, like you said, social media, and the desire to, fit in and please others, as we navigate this time. Yeah. Dr. Satnarine?
These are wonderful points raised by Dr. Tewari, and they ring true with a lot of my experience with students over the decades at higher educational institutions. One of the things that we kind of overlook when we're dealing with our newly minted, university-going students is that for the time that they're at home, they do have a thread to hold on to, this continuity, this ready-made pathway. And if you brush up against the edges, you're going to have those little buffers that will push you right back onto the center, and you'll continue going. But it's for this reason that we have sanskaras, the lovely, rites of passage, to really honor the fact that, well, at different moments in life, when you move from one to the other, there is a significant lane departure that is involved. And we need to honor it. We need to understand that we're going to be pivoting. And we need to learn how to move in this new lane with the same kind of confidence and the same kind of groundedness that we had as we were going before that. What ends up happening when a lot of the students that I've seen move into the university fold is that because they've been such high achievers, or they've been trying their best their whole life, and they've had, this village around them taking care of them, once they're let loose into the jungle, a nice jungle, but a jungle nonetheless, that is the university or the college experience, things can start to become unhinged. There is no longer that buffer that, okay, we've pushed up against the edge of what we know. How do we get back to the center? And what ends up happening is we find a lot of students end up going down dark lanes, lanes that are new to them, which is completely fine. Hindus are absolutely at home with new and trying new things and experimenting and all of that good stuff. But the moment where those lanes, we're being led down them by other people, that's where we would say that, okay, we need to get things back on track. And one of the easiest ways to get things back on track that I've seen is just really focusing on the basics: hydration, nutrition, your spiritual care, your self-care, your routines, what time you're getting up, what time you're sleeping, working with your circadian rhythm, making sure you're having a wide variety of things to eat, so that you're really setting yourself up for the challenge of adapting to this new environment. So I think that answers a little bit of the story, and I'm sure we're going to discuss a lot of the rest of the journey as we continue.
Yeah, thank you so much for expanding on this idea of what it means to transition from the security we feel at home to college. I'm personally the mom of two toddlers, but I've been reading a lot about how like we've lost this opportunity in my generation of parents to let our kids take risks and safe, like low risk risks, when they're young. And that is actually really tied to the higher rates of anxiety and depression we're seeing when kids get to college. And so I know a lot of the people we have joining us tonight are parents. So I think grappling with this idea you're presenting of like, while we're safe at home, giving children a chance to take low risk risks and understand what that process is so that when they feel more unmoored in the jungle that is college, um, they have a little more confidence in themselves, in their ability to manage those things. And I love how you put like going back to the basics and feeling rooted again, values in our samskaras um, is really key to taking care of ourselves in a time that can be hard. So I appreciate that. Mr. Ramaswamy, you're able to share from your own experience, of course, but what do you think are the toughest challenges and what helps you or what helps mitigate them?
Thank you. So that was very great insights I heard from all of you so far. I think from my perspective, as someone who was fairly recently in school and also someone who was born and brought up in the US and grew up in this culture, I think the root cause of the problem and what's been exacerbated more recently is this generation gap between children and their parents. Because I think very often the parents end up being people who grew up in a different culture. Maybe they grew up in, whether it's South Asia, a different country, or even if it was in the United States, a different time. And there's a lot that has changed from then until now. And ultimately, parents always have their children's well-being at heart. But the fact is, there's a lot of things that have changed really in that time period and across cultures as well. And I think what too often happens is that parents try to, they often think this is how my children must act and must behave, and they often set too rigid of goals, once they're already adults and in college. And that tends to fray the relationship, whereby the ideal relationship is that college students are able to ask their parents, be in touch with them, be very open with them, without fear of judgment, but just making sure that their parents can advise them to do the right thing. But I think too often it becomes the other way around. And I think especially what's happened since COVID, since the pandemic, where there's been a much bigger epidemic of loneliness. There's been a very big change in terms of how students have been living their lives with the pandemic and all those additional stresses and pressures that often people from the older generations just aren't able to understand. And then the last thing I'll mention here is also related to Hinduism and the dharmas, in that I think too often the folks from the older generation are often not able to give satisfactory explanations to why should we do this or why should we not do this. And often it leads the children to end up not listening to them because they're not able to fully understand why a certain thing is happening or not. And I think that's why it's extremely important for university environment to have other ways of understanding those kinds of traditions, so you can really see that. And that's something I saw at Georgetown with Dharmic Law Students Association, with Dharmic Life, where we had that kind of resource available for students. That's something which I believe should happen in more universities, but it's something where there's a big difference in terms of if students are able to learn more about their own traditions and learn more about how to safely experiment, how to be safe. That's the ideal situation.
Yeah, thank you so much for like adding a whole different dimension to this idea of like what is really tough is this generation gap, and what can be really tough is when it feels like that precludes being able to really talk and be open and go to parents who are such an important space and bastion of safety, right? Because of the fear, like you said, of judgment, or fear that our parents' experiences and their rigidity will stop us from really being able to explain what we're not explain, but understand what we're going through. So yeah, I really appreciate that dimension to, it's social media, it's this new experience of being in a unmoored place. And it's also this generation gap that can lead to challenges. But I also hear all of you sharing, right? Like, as hard as we know it can be, that we know that our dharma and our faith can be such a huge source of strength. Though, of course, like I think the other really important point you made is we also need to understand how to grapple with it and be able to go on our own journeys of questioning it to own it more securely than if we're expected to just abide by it without having the opportunity to like truly, truly grapple with it. So my next question for all of you was that we named this a little bit, but there's a number of parents here hoping to support their children in the transition from college, from home to college. So what do you guys think, as like specifically speaking to parents again, is really important for them to know? And maybe we can start with Dr. Satnarine this time.
Sure. It's a really important question. And I think that without sounding too alarmist or anything, it is so important that we take stock of who we are as people. As parents, we are trying our best. We've got our feet in many different, vehicles, driving up and down different types of streets, trying to make sure everything is there together. Then on top of that, we're being told, oh no, we have this thing to do as well. It's kind of sad that we do have to do it, because back, in many of our backgrounds, we could rely on many other people to join in and share the work. But a lot of the workload is on two people, the household heads, if you'd put it that way, the parents or the guardians. And it's a lot. And I really understand it as parents that it is a tough challenge. But there is a significant investment that I'm going to ask of parents, just from my point of view, and I'm sure Dr. Tewari and Mr. Ramaswamy will have different views. But from my point of view, understanding that empathy is so important, and you might not have experimented in your own youth in the way that students will experiment or meet new experiences in the environments at college campuses in the US. But we all have that tendency. We all had that tendency. Maybe we still have that tendency to want to understand things, want to know things. And we all know how it feels to be shut down immediately once we've told something. And, we might say to our kids, well, you can tell us anything. We're there for you no matter what. But as soon as we start opening our mouths to the parents, then, stamp. You can't say anything more. Or that look. And it doesn't even have to be words. Just that look of disappointment that comes over the face of a parent can be soul crushing for a child. It doesn't matter how young they are. They might be 20, they might be 40. But that one look from the parent can really just stop that. What it leads to is this feeling of unmooredness. And I liken, this experience to being like a hot air balloon. And the student might start floating away, and other people will start to bring it down to where they want it to land. Or other people might suggest, well, why don't you try this thing, negative thing? Why don't you try this thing, unhealthy thing? Why don't you try this thing, really troublesome, sticky messes kind of things? So in order to understand how best to support our students these days, I think that parents should try their best to develop faculties of suspending judgment and listening bravely. Those are the two things I would say parents could try to work on if they're finding it a challenge at the beginning.
I really love that phrase of listening bravely. And the empathy you were offering to parents of like, I know it's hard. Of course it's hard. And it's just imperative to be able to really be open and accepting so that we can have a connection to our kids and their full experience. Yeah. What about you, Ashwin?
Yeah, I'd say I think I'm far too young to be giving advice to parents, but at the same time, I can speak from my own experience with my own parents, and I've seen what has worked well So maybe from the perspective of all the children, of the students. And I think it just echoing what Dr. Satnarine said. It's really about suspending judgment, just being open. And really, it's there's a saying which as I've heard a lot, especially from our community, that children are just like it's just like a bow and an arrow. Once you shoot the arrow, then you can't control it. But what the parents is that the goal of the parents is to make sure that the students have the right value system and belief system in place. So from a young age, going and maybe learning about whether it's a religious tradition, learning about what's right, what's wrong, how to treat people. Often that comes by leading with an example. And I think in my case, my parents have always been very kind people, very humble people, loving folks as well. And that's something which my brother and I saw, and we decided we want to be like that too. And I think if you're able to make it so that the house is a loving house and it's not a house where everyone's fighting, it's a place where no one is judgmental and you're just able to accept people for who they are and love people for who they are, that makes a big impact. And ultimately, that's what determines the choices that people like me make.
That is so beautifully stated, Ashwin, and I really appreciate that you're able to share like what an impact it means to have a positive model and not just positive words in the home you're growing up in. Again, I have toddlers. I feel like it's going to come up a lot, but I know like love and like really strict boundaries in trying to keep them safe and in trying to give them the experiences that they're going to need is so important. And the idea that, it leads to young men like yourself is really exciting. And again, I think just ties back to this idea that we have to build a lot of trust with our parents and with our kids in order to be equipped to deal with the autonomy that comes with this exciting and scary phase of life. Yeah. Dr. Tewari, please continue to add to the wisdom of like what parents can take away.
Yes, I loved what Dr. Satnarine said, and to add to the empathy and the listening bravely, as well as what Mr. Ramaswami has said. I'm going to add two more words and have parents think about don't dictate, facilitate. I think, it's really important for parents to really learn to ask supportive questions rather than lecturing or making the judgmental comments that were referred to by the other speakers. I think when you ask kids, how is your college adjustment going? I think young adults are very attuned to the voice tones, the facial expressions, and the way in which it's asked. And I think being aware of that is going to be really important to facilitate growth in young adults. And there's been actually a lot of good psychological studies that the nature of the relationship between the parents and children and young adults has a positive relationship with the level in which you adhere to your culture, your traditions, your values, and even religion. So if parents are able to maintain positive, non-judgmental relationships, ones that are open and supportive, it increases the chances of kids wanting to carry on some of the customs, traditions, values that were taught in the home when they lived under your roof before they went off to college. So it's part of the natural course for kids to want to take some risks and break some rules and not do some of the things that you want them to do. It's just part of separation, individuation, and that developmental life cycle. So I would add to their, parents, don't worry too much, trust your kids in that process. And I know that they're on their own for the first time. And if you have college kids who have gone off for the first time, then you're too experiencing that adjustment as well. I am the parent of two young adults, a 20-year-old and a 23-year-old. So I have one graduated from college and one currently in college. So I myself had to remind myself, don't dictate, don't lecture, facilitate, ask questions, come from a place of curiosity.
Yeah, I love the idea of adding like the value of bravery, but also like genuine curiosity and a genuine ability to really understand that their experience is different and like grounded in the person that like you raised them to be. I think that's really lovely. Yeah. So, we've talked already about how it can be a challenging period, but for international students in particular, they have the added challenge of adjusting to American culture while navigating college life. So, you know, we'd love to hear you guys speak a little bit more about what you want them to know about the assets they come in with and what else they can access to set themselves up for success. And maybe we can start with you, Mr. Ramaswamy.
So to start with, I would just remind folks that American culture is not something that's static or fixed. It's something that's always been changing throughout our history. It's something which we create ourselves, and it's something which international students are very much a part of it as well. And so just keeping that in mind, that it's, yes, it may feel like a culture shock to come to this country from elsewhere, and there are many customs that are different, but in a way, every person is valued, and everyone here builds the culture that we ultimately want to create here. So there's absolutely no problem in continuing your own traditions, your own cultural beliefs. Of course, it's always, make sure you're respecting everyone else and all that, but that's just something to keep in mind. I think one shining gem of American culture is our diversity and how we have people from across the world, whether they're people who live here or people who are just studying here as well. And I would just keep that in mind. I would say, just from my experience working with international students, it's always helpful to find other international students who have shared similar kinds of experiences, because ultimately it is unfortunate, but there are a lot of disadvantages in terms of being an international student, in terms of whether it's immigration and visa issues, or whether it's just getting the same level of treatment as domestic students do. But I think just making sure you're able to access those resources, whether it's other people in your situation, whether it's other students who may share similar cultural background as you but are domestic. Don't be afraid to ask for help from other students. And there's been so many instances where really just forming those connections has been extremely helpful for them. I know it's tough to adjust to a new city, let alone a new country, but really just talking and being open, I think is one way to ensure you have the resources you need.
Thank you so much for being able to remind us that it's important to acknowledge that there is still a gap in resources and support. That's important to acknowledge, right? And also that there are still resources, there are support, not just like the cultures we're coming from, and knowing that we can draw so much strength from them, and that, we're trying to work on creating more and more resources. And the Hindu American Foundation has released this guide that is a huge reason that we wanted to have this webinar today. And it's very much geared towards giving international students some more of those resources. So I hope everyone will take a gander at that and see that a lot more support is accessible than sometimes we might fear. Yeah, so thank you. Dr. Tewari, what else should international students know?
Yeah, I have a nephew at UC San Diego who has navigated the international student process. And I think what I've appreciated learning from him and the other students who are also international students with him is the effort that has been put in seeking and creating social connections. I think it goes without saying amidst the physical health, the basics of, eating well and exercising, but the importance of social health. And sometimes when it's difficult to figure out what the resources are on campus, whether it's through student affairs, student services, your specific academic department or so on, I think there's always the default of connecting with peers and learning, and whether it's, calling someone to plan an event or grabbing a coffee, leaving your dorm room open, but inviting that kind of human connection that I think is often missing in a day and age where people are connected in other ways besides in person. So I would say be resourceful, have intergenerational conversations with faculty, professors, graduate students, people of, you know, different cultures other than your own, and really be able to take the best of both worlds, whether it be Indian or American, and be able to integrate it as you continue to expand your perspectives and learn about what American university life is all about.
Absolutely. Thank you for really being able to expand again on um, the things that we can tangibly and concretely do to facilitate this process of adjusting to appreciating everything there is to love and appreciate about this country, while also knowing what it means to hold on to everything we're bringing with us as well. Yeah. Dr. Satnarine?
Sure. Two things came to mind, and I'm going to try my best to rattle them off pretty quickly. First is, just a little lay of the land, and then the second is a point about proportionality. So, in terms of lay of the land, most students will be interfacing with the university through the Office of Admissions, international students admissions, but also they will get the international student centers once they land on their university campuses. In terms of provisioning, a lot of these centers are held under student affairs, and some of them are held under president's offices in certain university situations. What I'm basically talking about is the sources of funding for these places. Most of these resources are underfunded, and they rely a lot on supplemental resourcing and support and programs from across other groups and departments in a university. Those university departments are similarly stretched. And so you will get in an international student orientation, you will get a list, and you'll get presenters come in from the Women's Center, from the LGBTQ Center, from the Counseling and Psychiatric Services Centers, and so on and so forth. Of course, the academic deans and everything else. All of these people are there to help our students navigate this international experience. But that is all very procedural, and it's all the stuff that we can check off on our lists and our planners and things. But the realities of life, the messiness of life, that's a piece of the story that can be addressed with the resources that are given in those presentations. But more often than not, students find themselves in situations where they're not able to access those particular services, either due to barriers of culture or language or perception or whatever the case may be. And it's at that moment in time that those groups that have interests in speaking and interfacing with and making international students part of their community, those types of groups will send their international focused members to go and speak to these new international students, especially the ones that they deem are struggling. Some of this is off the bat of these organizations' own charters, and some of them are just because they're good at it, the university will quietly rely on them. So to Mr. Ramaswamy's point, and also to Dr. Tewari's point, the social point, forming your bonds, is really important. But to be able to have the reflectionary period between, I have a trigger, I need to solve, that little ability to step back and take a look at who are we actually going to get this help from? Did we do a little bit of a check? Everybody's good at Google these days. Are we doing a background check of the organizations that we're interfacing with? Are we doing a little bit of a check of, okay, we have X, Y, and Z professors? Even in classes, it's something that's good to do. Just really get to understand who you're going with, because everybody comes with a bias, everybody comes with a worldview, everybody comes with a point of view. And it's really easy to lose sight of those things at moments of crises or moments of acute need. So I would say that that's, in my point of view, an important factor to keep in mind, just because I've seen firsthand what happens to international students when they're preyed upon. And the second thing I would say is proportionality. What I mean by proportionality is international students will come in, and the cocoon, or not cocoon, the walls seem to shrink when you get into the university. You go in there with this enthusiasm, want to meet everyone, you want to, have new experiences. And as soon as they hear my accent, bam, that's done. And the walls start to close in on us. Oh, the accent, oh, your food smells, oh, you do this, or oh, this, or oh, that. And all of these pejoratives, that little small pejoratives that come out in words or in phrases or even on just body language, we pick up on that as international people. I'm an international person myself. And things start to get, closed in. Point I want to make about proportionality is it's not necessarily just because we come from a different place. It's just because humans want to find ways of difference and using difference to understand their own worldviews. And so the way that I would say proportionality works is that, okay, you might go to Starbucks and your name, Jayendra might be turned into Jane or something. But a person from, some of the southern states might come to the northeastern states and get that same amount of ridicule as well, because they've come from those states. A person from the East Coast going to the West Coast will be challenged on their East Coast views. Humans do this. This is natural. So don't feel so disconnected from everyone and everything that you start going down dark rabbit holes. That's my little point about proportionality.
I really appreciate the very honest warning about what it can be like to be an international student, and to feel like you kind of inoculate yourself to being preyed upon in the environment you're in. And also, of course, the proportionality of really being able to understand that, of course, this is a difficult experience and people will make it more difficult, but we have everything within us to avoid these dark paths, and to stay on the reason that we're choosing to be international students, of course. A theme that has been really present in the questions that I've posed to the panelists is somewhat related. So I'll just read Mihir Meghani's question for you guys. He shared that I was in college in the 1990s and there was immense pressure, institutional pressure from anti-Hindu professors, social pressures from non-Hindu entities to give up Hinduism. It motivated me here, as we all know, to remain Hindu and strongly Hindu, but it negatively impacted others who lost some self-confidence in Hindu dharma. So, whoever wants to should feel free to speak to how your experience can help incoming or current college students, given the political and ideological situations at campuses today.
Happy to. Oh, do you want to go ahead first?
No, please, Mr. Ramaswamy, go ahead.
Okay, I'll speak first, especially given my recent experience at the colleges. And what I've seen is that a lot of times the root cause here is just a lack of understanding of Hinduism or the dharmas or these different traditions in the first place. What's really, really helpful is what we had at something like at Georgetown, where we had at the time, it was called Dharmic Life, which is like a chaplaincy program, where it's not just about academically learning about these religions, but it's about actually finding a community of people to actively practice those religions with. So every Sunday we would go, there would be an Arati program at the Dharmalaya, which is a multi-faith space. where it had shrines for Hindu faith, Buddhist, Jain, Sikh, and other dharmas as well. It was a very accessible way to actually learn about our traditions and talk about it with like-minded people and students. And I think that's something which really, really strengthened our own conviction in the tradition, because you start to realize it's not something that's cast, it's not something thrown upon you. It's something which you are reclaiming and you are helping to create and grow yourself. And I think that's so crucial. And that's something where when I was at Stanford, we didn't have such a program at all. Personally, for me, like growing up, I went to Bal Vihar, which is a program which taught me about my own Hindu culture and values. I did a lot of sadhana myself and spiritual practice, so I was okay. But a lot of my classmates didn't have those same like ability to be moored to a particular tradition. And often there's just so many different ideas that come to you at college. And if you don't have that kind of routine and kind of regular doing that, it's much tougher. So that's what I would say is really important. Universities should be investing, and what that means is that our community should be investing philanthropically, funding those kinds of centers at universities. So how what happened at Georgetown should happen across the country. And for places where that's not there yet, we should support students to help form study groups or ways that they can really explore their own tradition, learn about it, because that's the most effective way to actually fully understand it, is to actually go deep into it.
What an incredible call to action for our community, Ashwin, to be able to name that like it is a responsibility now to invest in the structures that are going to inoculate our children, our students, our loved ones. I have to throw in that like I'm so grateful that I grew up my father's daughter, and that he like from an early age just like gave me like these little doses of being able to understand what I would see in college, and gave me chances to like actually grapple with my faith. When I asked why I was vegetarian, he didn't just tell me, because he took me to a PETA meeting, which was a little unorthodox, but like really it was profound for me, right? And so when I got to college and got to be the president of our Hindu Students Association, and like actually seriously grapple with like what does it mean to live a Hindu life while also like having a great time, indulging in all the new experiences we've talked about, was just like I think profound and like hugely instrumental to who I am today as someone I think I can be pretty proud of. So I really appreciate you reminding us that there's a lot we can do at home, but there's a lot we can do to invest in the infrastructure of Hindu life in the US in order to build that. Yeah.
Can I just add one more thing to add? I would say ultimately the goal is to create those resources so they're available. But in this kind of religion culture, it should never be forced at all. Of course, when you're growing up as children, it's good for parents to teach and make sure they're immersed in this culture. But it's ultimately everyone's decision. And we even learned, like based on people's vasanas, based on their tendencies, they may end up doing something else, right? Some may stay, some may leave the tradition. But it's our job to make sure that all the resources are available so that they can fully understand it before they make that decision.
Yeah, that's beautiful, right? We have to have faith that our centuries old tradition like really has some value, and we don't have to force it. It's just very natural for us to gravitate towards maintaining it, right? Yeah. I didn't know if Dr. Satnarine or Dr. Tewari wanted to add to Mr. Ramaswamy.
Okay. Were you raising your hand? I wasn't
No,
sure.
I was gesturing. Dr. Tewari, you go ahead, and then I'll add just something at the end.
I was going to share, just my own personal experiences, and it's a tough act to follow after that call to action, but I was going to identify with the person who asked the question and share that they were in college in the 90s. I too went to undergraduate in the 90s. I'm California born. Lived in America my entire life. I was raised, fortunately, with parents who exposed me to different Hindu mandirs, and I married someone who's Indian American and Hindu as well. So I had the opportunity to go to a variety of different Hindu-based faith spaces, whether it's the Hare Krishna mandirs, the Vedanta Society, the Ramakrishna, monastery, and so on. But for me, I did also experience some challenges with, other religions attempting to question, to convert, to dismiss, to dismantle, some of my upbringing and some of my roots. But it was very clear to me that during my undergraduate years in college and even throughout graduate school, that I was really forced to have to reckon with all parts of my identity. In the United States, they often make you think about, your race, your ethnicity, your religion. So I think I became quite well versed in understanding and knowing and defining who I am as an Asian American, racially, as someone who ethnically identifies as Indian American and who religiously identifies as a Hindu American. I have found that all of these identities, especially my Hindu American identity, has really rooted me and grounded me in my sense of security, control, faith, spirituality, and even just feeling overall confidence um, in situations when you're so often faced with comparing yourselves to others, what others have, what others are, who you're not. So I encourage all the young college students to explore that and see the richness of where you come from. And I hope you can embrace those parts of it in whatever shape, form that looks like for you.
Thank you. I really appreciate your ability to share your own experience and what really worked in really reifying and solidifying that Hindu identity. Dr. Satnarine?
I love the point about, how this identity speaks to you that Dr. Tewari gave to us. And I think that's so important on university and college campuses. I'm involved in both sides of the world. I'm involved both on the spiritual care side of the world, but also on the academic side of the world. And in the academic side of the world, we face something that is kind of counterintuitive to Hindu spiritualities, which is that we're actually seeking to wrap ourselves in an identity, whereas our spiritualities are trying to help us offload all of these false identities and names and labels so that we can get closer to who we are as Atma. So it's kind of a juxtaposition, but I may have a little bit of an idea of how to navigate both of those, at least from my perspective. And that is understanding that we're being put into a box, an identifiable box, so that the host culture, the host community can figure us out. We need to understand that that box is not of our making. And all of the different sides and all of the different ways that this box is being created, it's, as Mr. Ramaswamy mentioned before, it's a dynamic process. It is undergoing change as we speak. But at the moment, it's solidifying in a way that I think is disingenuous to the history and to the realities of our dharma's growths and evolution over time. It is portraying our identity as a very fixed set of nonsensical practices and adherences that have absolutely no grounding or reasoning, whereas the 3 million odd Sanskrit, Tamil, Prakrit, different types of texts that we have will show that that's not the case. I want us to just dwell on this point about identity for just a moment. If we had the ability to live in our, our ancestors had this ability to live in this ancient place with hundreds and hundreds of different tribes. 4,400 is the estimated number of different tribes and people groups that were part and parcel of our history. They all lived together in some way, shape, or form. We had atheists, we had monotheists, devotionalists, we had people who were high philosophers, we had people who just wanted to get through the day, we had people who were working to make ends meet, and we had people who were just completely charitable. All of those different ways of being never alienated one person from another. we should be able to bring that mindset with us here. If someone here is drinking every single day alcohol, they should not be ostracized as not Hindu. Oh, you're not following. Who's telling us what we're following? Do we even read our Mahabharata? How many people would, you know? I'm not going to go down that road today because that demands a lot more time. But there's so much variety in our dharmas. There's so much acceptance for the natural states of human beings that if we turn into the judgmental people that these box creators want us to be, we end up taking the hammer to our own ancestors' traditions. So, really understanding that our dharma is a place for variety. It's not nonsensical. Let's make this quite clear. There's reason behind it. There is reason, there's logic. We just have to go deep enough. We need to pick up the books, or if we are not able to listen to people who are not just regurgitating what the box creators want us to say, but really delve into our dharmas, and you'll see that no matter how you are, so long as you feel a spiritual connection to our ancestral tradition, or not just because it's our ancestral, because it's something that's universally beneficial to people on this planet. We have many people who don't come from, South Asia, who do practice Hindu Dharma traditions. And if there is a iota of harmony with the ways that these philosophies and practices are presented, then we're Hindu. It doesn't matter how we are. We are Hindu. And just because Professor A or Group B has said that this is how Hindus are, you're not that way, or that Hindus are like this, that's disgusting, how can you be that way? I would say, we should say, okay, that's your opinion. Thank you very much. Respect is what we should be giving people, but we don't have to be doormats either.
That is just so beautiful, Dr. Satnarine. In like the profound acceptance that is Hinduism, and an acknowledgement of the forces that almost push us to forget that, to define ourselves in Judeo-Abrahamic space. And I just want to remind everyone that what everyone has spoken to is the necessity of like the resources and the support to see that and understand that when we are most vulnerable. And that is what is so beautiful about what the Hindu American Foundation does. That is what's so beautiful about us even being able to facilitate having this conversation here today. So I hope everyone can really appreciate the work that we're trying to do. We're coming towards the end of our time today, so I thought I'd ask. I think you kind of spoke to this, of course, Dr. Satnarine, about what a Hindu identity is, but I wanted to invite Mr. Ramaswamy and Dr. Tewari, if there's anything you want to say to that, or even just kind of a closing piece of advice you want to impart to our audience today.
Well, for me, I shared a little bit of it in my own sort of personal recollection and evolution, but I think in defining your own Hindu identity, I very much highlight and bold the word your. And I think that it is true. People like to define what it means to be Hindu. And you're always going to be either criticized in some way or shape or form by doubters or, those who may be of other religions. But again, just be strong in figuring out what it means for you and define how you want to be Hindu, despite your behaviors, your thoughts, how you've engaged in certain ways of life. Don't judge yourself in defining who you are as a Hindu.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ramaswamy.
Yeah, so I would just start by saying, I often, when people ask me about what is Hinduism, like what religion are you, I have to explain to them that in our dharmas there isn't as rigid of a demarcation between religion and philosophy, for example. And a lot of these concepts we're importing from the West don't always map neatly onto our own traditions. And so when people are thinking about Hindu identity, just keeping in mind that what we refer to as Hinduism includes so many traditions. Some of them are monotheistic, some of them are atheistic, some of them are monist. They're all different kinds of ways of thinking about the world. Some of them are non-theistic too. They don't focus on a deity to worship, but more on a philosophy, a way of life. So just keeping that diversity in mind is so important. And just like what Dr. Tewari said, it's about your identity and how are you going to take this ocean of different ways of thinking and thought and figure out what works best for you, because there is no correct way to be a Hindu. It's about whether you're claiming part of this tradition for yourself or not. And I would just say for folks who do claim it, just just like what Dr. Satnarine said, don't draw yourself in a box. Don't say I'm Hindu and because you're doing X, you can't be it too. Realizing that it's all about pluralism, and that's all about what our traditions are about, because the whole idea is that out of the many is that oneness. So that's the way to think about it.
That's really lovely. And I hope this idea that like what it means to be Hindu is to be a pluralist, to be connected with the divinity within everyone, and to be a seeker of truth is something that we can tap into the profound and human joy of having a community around, like in acknowledging all of our nuances and all of our differences, in appreciating what it means to be Hindu. That we still get that lovely like community feel too. And I hope everyone can keep drawing strength from that, because the more I read about modern psychology, the more that I understand that it's, if anything that is research-based and science-based will come back to the observations that sages had for centuries, right? And will come back to Hinduism too. And so, again, in this exhilarating and terrifying time of life, I hope that everyone sees that there's a lot of support out there, like literally with HAF being able to create these resources for you, but also just in your individual journey of understanding what it really means to be Hindu, which is what it means to be you. So we ran 1 minute over, but we're so grateful to everyone for making the time to join us tonight. And of course, thank you so much to just our incredible, eloquent panelists for being able to share the wisdom, also the cautionary warnings, but also the faith that we can keep serving our community, which means serving ourselves in all the work we do. So we did record this, we will be sharing it. So please feel encouraged and, pushed even to share this with anyone you think who could really benefit from the messages we've shared tonight. So thank you again.